All right, so I want to take a few more minutes here just to explain a little bit about the vision behind the Gateway Creation Conference. Our conference motto is the truth of Scripture revealed in creation. And we hope that this conference might be a little bit different than you might expect. In today's culture, we are incessantly taught that science is in opposition to faith, that science is inherently material and naturalistic, and unfortunately, many times we as believers will unconsciously accept this false dichotomy and see science as either an opponent to faith or at best mostly irrelevant to our Christian walk. Now, this is ironic if we look at the history of science. We see that it was Christian beliefs that provide the foundation for much of modern science. Foundational beliefs like that truth is knowable, or that a benevolent God would provide us with senses that are generally trustworthy and able to perceive reality, and the belief that a faithful and consistent creator God would uphold the universe with consistent natural laws that reflected his unchanging character. One might argue that the term creation science is, or should be, somewhat redundant, at least when it comes to natural science. It should be the study of creation, in order to better understand not only the creation itself, but also to understand God and how he interacts with his creation. And this is entirely consistent with what the Bible itself tells us. Romans 1:21 says that God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. And so if it's true that God's characteristics can be understood in the creation, and science is the study of these things that are made, then it would follow that science can and ought to be revealing things that testify of God's character, of his activity in the history of his creation, and it should be consistent with what we see in Scripture. Psalm 19 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork." And this tells us something about ourselves as well. Psalms 19 goes on to say that these created things, they proclaim God's glory without speech or language. And yet, how much more then can we, those of us who have been recreated in Jesus Christ, how much more can we testify of God's glory and majesty and his mercy and his love to the world? And might not creation, if we understood it better, if we knew how to listen, might this not help motivate us and even equip us to better exalt the name of Christ? I believe that it can. And it's not only the magnificent or beautiful works of the Lord that God's character is displayed, it's also in the aspects of creation that are destructive. They remind us that creation is fallen, that the wages of sin is death, and that our only source of hope is in the redeeming work of Christ, who will one day reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven. So this is the perspective that we're hoping to bring to this conference and to the concept of creation science. We don't want to look at creation science as a veneer, a Christian veneer on an otherwise materialistic enterprise, but rather the study of the works of the Lord in creation and in history. And why does this matter? Well, God says it matters. God makes a big deal about the fact that he is the creator. In Revelation, the angels declare God's worthiness to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, to use King James. And ultimately, this brings us back to Jesus Christ. In Colossians, it says that all things were created by him and for him and through him, and this is speaking of Jesus Christ. And if science is simply the study of material things, then, well, perhaps it doesn't have much value to a Christian. But if in reality science is the study of what God has wrought, of his divine attributes, of his acts in earth history, and if in learning and doing and sharing science, we are upholding and proclaiming the truth of the Creator and the truth of Scripture, well, then science can have an eternal value. Not everyone is called to be a scientist, of course, but every one of us can benefit from being reminded about how great our God is, how deserving he is of our obedience, of our worship, of our service. And I believe creation science can be a tremendous vessel to that end.